Let's dive right in. 8 jobs that used to be bottom tier but are now dream careers. Number 8. Acting. Look at Hollywood stars on the red carpet, worth millions and idolized by fans everywhere. But travel back to ancient Rome or the Middle Ages, and those A-listers would hit rock bottom instantly. They'd be considered the absolute lowest of the low. In ancient Rome, actors were labeled infamia, putting them on the same level as prostitutes and grave robbers. The law stripped them of every basic civil right. They couldn't testify in court, marry free citizens, or even defend themselves if they were attacked in public. The ancient logic was brutal. Back then, acting for a living was seen as having zero dignity or self-respect. It got even worse in the Middle Ages when the church controlled morality. Priests called theaters the devil's chapel, and actors the puppets of evil. No matter how talented you were essentially damned. Actors were banned from holy sacraments and denied a proper burial in church grounds. Their bodies were often tossed at crossroads or dumped in fields reserved for criminals and outcasts. Imagine a Hollywood star begging for a funeral and being turned away just because of their job. Basically, buying a ticket to a show was supporting someone's society already damned to hell. Actors were considered lower than the dirt on your shoes. Number 7. Surgeons. Today we see surgeons as high-paid geniuses with elite degrees and golden hands. But don't be fooled. This prestige is a very recent thing. Centuries ago, if you needed surgery, you didn't go to a doctor. You went to the local barber who just finished shaving someone. For a long time, surgery and barbering were the same job, known as the barber surgeon. Doctors back then thought dealing with blood was dirty manual labor, far too low for their status. They stuck to reading texts and checking pulses, refusing to ever step foot in an operating room. Amputations and tooth extractions were left to barbers since they were already handy with sharp blades. That spinning red, white, and blue barber pole? It's a creepy relic from those days. Red stands for blood, white for bandages, and the pole represents the rod patients held while enduring surgery without anesthesia. To the elite, surgeons were just glorified butchers who lacked any real intelligence or class. Would you really trust the guy who just sharpened his razor to save your life? Number 6. Dentists. You might fear the dentist today with our comfy chairs, anesthesia, and sterile tools. But that's nothing compared to the nightmare of ancient dentistry. Back in the Middle Ages, dentists literally didn't exist. Dental care was a bottom-tier job left to blacksmiths with giant pliers or shady traveling scammers. Their logic was simple and violent. They thought toothaches were caused by worms, and the only fix was ripping the tooth out by force. It didn't matter if they shattered your jaw or caused a deadly infection. These dentists were so low class they performed in public squares, turning your agony into street entertainment. With no anesthesia, they'd hire drummers and musicians to drown out your screams while they yanked your teeth out. People saw them as bottom-tier scammers, just butchers making a few bucks by torturing people. With no medical training or degrees, they relied on rusty pliers and a little booze for disinfection. Today, spending big money on braces or veneers is a major status symbol. Back then, needing a dentist meant you were desperate, and the person digging around in your mouth was barely above a beggar. Number 5. Musicians. Imagine being a pop superstar like Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber, living in luxury and making millions overnight. But throw that fame back to 17th or 18th century Europe, and your glory would vanish instantly. Back then, even geniuses like Mozart were just treated as glorified household servants for the nobility. They wore servant uniforms, ate with the staff in the kitchen, and only played music when their masters ordered them to. Their status relied entirely on the moody whims of royalty, and getting fired was a constant fear. In feudal Japan or China, musicians were looked down on even more, often labeled as the lowest social class. Street performers and wandering musicians were seen as lazy, homeless, and morally corrupt. They were completely banned from taking government exams. Their daughters couldn't marry into respectable families, and they were denied a proper burial. In 17th century Germany, strict guild rules banned them from touching certain instruments or playing too loudly in public. Today, obsessing over your favorite pop star is totally normal. But to our ancestors, idolizing someone for their voice was a sign of serious cultural decline. Back then, music was just background noise for the elite. Number 4, secretaries. You're working in a skyscraper, handling the boss's schedule and feeling pretty powerful as an executive assistant. Travel back to ancient Rome or the Middle Ages, and this job wasn't a career, it was a job for slaves. Even if they were educated, multilingual, and held state secrets, they were still just property. They were forced to write for hours in the dark until their hands were stiff and their eyes failed. If they made a typo in a legal document, they didn't get docked pay. They got whipped or branded. Even later, before typewriters, secretarial work was seen as a boring, dead-end job for men who couldn't find success elsewhere. They were basically human copy machines, stuck in dusty offices copying dry documents for peanuts. The stereotypical secretary back then was broke, hunched over, and going nowhere fast. It wasn't until the 20th century that the job evolved into the professional, respected role we know today. You're sitting in a comfy chair, but your job's ancestor was once a slave chained to a desk. Number 3, banking. Today, a career in banking is a dream for so many. With nice suits, high pay, and massive bonuses, they're seen as pillars of the economy. But travel back to the Middle Ages, and you wouldn't be invited to parties. You'd be excommunicated and damned to hell. Back then, charging interest on loans was considered a disgusting sin, just as bad as murder. Theologians argued that money is lifeless and shouldn't grow like livestock or crops. They claimed making money off interest was literally stealing time from God. Bankers were despised as greedy, immoral bloodsuckers who preyed on the poor. Since Christians were banned from it, Jews were forced into the role, making them targets for historic discrimination and violence. In the Divine Comedy, Dante even stuck bankers in the 7th circle of hell, forced to sit under a rain of fire for eternity. Even in death, they were often denied a proper religious burial. So, by ancient standards, that platinum credit card in your wallet is basically a first-class ticket straight to hell. Number 2, chefs. Today, chefs are seen as masters of art and power in the kitchen. Icons like Gordon Ramsay or Anthony Bourdain are treated like rock stars. Michelin star restaurants are holy sites where people book a year in advance just for a taste. But take that chef's coat back to a medieval castle and you wouldn't be signing autographs. You'd be stuck in a hot, smoky basement slaving away. Back then, cooking wasn't an art. It was considered the dirtiest, lowest-ranking manual labor in the house. They were just kitchen knaves, sweating over open fires with no ventilation and breathing in grease and soot all day. Chefs were so low on the totem pole that they were usually the first ones blamed when things went wrong. If the Lord didn't like his meal, you'd be cursed at, beaten, or even pelted with hot food. But the scariest part was the constant danger of losing your life over security scares. Royals were terrified of poison, so they constantly eyed their chefs with suspicion. If the king got a stomachache, the chef was the first one dragged out and tortured for treason. They lived in constant fear, working in filthy kitchens crawling with vermin with zero recognition. That fancy gold leaf steak you see today is the result of centuries of progress. But it was built on the blood, sweat, and tears of chefs once ranked lower than stable hands. Number 1, professional athletes. Athletes definitely take the top spot for the most dramatic career transformation in history. Just look at guys like Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi today. They're billionaires with private jets, beach mansions, and billions of fans worshiping them like gods. But if you transported them back to Roman times as gladiators, their lives would take a tragic turn. Sure, gladiators were famous, with crowds screaming their names and aristocrats swooning over them. But legally and socially, they were labeled infamia, outcasts. They were stripped of all civil rights and treated the same as slaves or prostitutes. They couldn't own property, marry legally, and most importantly, they didn't even own their own lives. They were bought and sold like property, with their survival depending on a thumbs down from a bloodthirsty crowd. Today's superstars get top-tier medical care and huge paychecks even when they're injured. Back then, if a gladiator fell, he was finished off right there on the sand for the crowd's entertainment. They lived like prisoners in cramped barracks, fed a carb-heavy diet to build a layer of protective fat, always facing death by the weekend. Modern athletes have it made because of our progress in freedom and human rights. Their Roman predecessors had to trade their blood and dignity just to be treated like trash. History teaches us a pretty chilling lesson. Fame is only worth something when you actually have your freedom and dignity. Jobs that used to be seen as worthless are now the most glamorous careers in the world. It's not that the jobs changed, it's that we finally learned to treat people with respect. If you found this as wild as I did, smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment because there's so much more history to cover. Catch you guys in the next one.